Hello and welcome to the 2023 edition of the KnowTalks, organized by the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation and the United Nations Development Programme. We are delighted to be back for another year of engaging sessions and informative discussions, bringing you subject matter experts from all around the world to discuss issues of knowledge. Over the past year, we have had the privilege of hosting 27 sessions with over 10,700 attendees joining us. And we are thrilled to be bringing you even more content this year in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and French. We are also excited to announce that also this year, we will be featured in events near you. So stay tuned for these announcements on our social media channels. We have also been listening to your suggestions, and this year's themes will thus include skills of the future, mindfulness and well-being, cybersecurity, space, tourism, and more. As the month of innovation comes to an end in the United Arab Emirates, we are excited to kick off our first session of the year titled, What Does It Take to Innovate? Our guest speaker is Anas Zeineddine, founder of innovaMENA, where he provides innovation advisory to several organizations. Anas has over 15 years of experience in leadership, engineering, project management, business operations, and working with Fortune 500 companies. He has co-founded 2 tech companies in Canada and led the development of the first private innovation hub in the UAE. Today, Anas will be sharing his insights on creating a culture of sustainable innovation, modern innovation, and technology transfer as a catalyst for innovation. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn as we delve into the world of innovation with Anas Zeineddine. A very warm welcome to you, Anas, and thank you for joining us today as our guest speaker.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Good morning, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to thank, first of all, Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation and the UNDP and KnowTalks for hosting this program. And thank you for all the hard work that was done in the background to get this, to make this happen. And today we have a very brief session. Actually, we're going to be discussing, I believe the timing is about 20 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A. So the topic that we'll be discussing today is going to be about innovation and what it takes to innovate. Let me just share my set of slides here.
Yes, Anas, just to say that I will be back for the Q&A session. So for our dear audience, be sure to drop any questions in the Q&A box. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started with Anas. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I presume you can see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So the title that I was presented with today is What It Takes to Innovate. And we're going to try to cover as much as we can in a very, very short period of time. This is going to be very compressed. And the key things that we're going to be touching upon today are, first is creating a culture of sustainable innovation. Who is involved? Who are the players? And then second, transitioning into modern innovation, and then specifically discussing the difference between incremental and disruptive innovation. And then finally, we'll touch base on technology transfer as a catalyst for innovation. So it's starting out, I'd like to just start out with a very brief definition, and then just more of a disclaimer. Innovation is a very, very broad topic, and there's a lot of different ideas and different schools of thoughts. And there's many different opinions and approaches on it. And it's actually a concept that is being evolved over time as we work with new processes, products, services, technologies, as markets evolve. So there's different scholars on these different approaches. I'll just try to cram everything into a 20-minute session as much as possible, and just to at least give you a bit of the overview on what was asked for this specific presentation. So in terms of innovation, I mean, by definition, it's technically an idea. It derives from the Latin word innovare, which means to renew or introduce something new. So technically speaking, anything that is innovation related is something that is a new idea, a new design, a product, a methodology. It could be a process but ultimately it needs to be a marketable product that comes as a result of an invention, so that the invention is some sort of product or some sort of a process, and it has to be adopted by a specific customer base within a specific market as either a product or service. And for this specific presentation today, the context that we're going to look at are three main ones. Number one is the product and service itself, so the actual invention. Second, we'll look at it from the context of organizations such as companies and institutions. And then third, we'll look at it from the startup world. So first, starting off with the types of innovation. There are four key types, and each one is defined by the type of domain and by the type of problem. So the first one, the bottom left quadrant, is basic research. So that is generally when the domain is not fully defined, and neither is the problem. So this is where we have the aim of discovering something that is truly new, where again, neither the problem nor the domain is defined. And there's a lot of organizations that actually spend heavily in cutting edge discoveries through research in this area as well. And this is where if you look at it from the organizational world, it's mostly within corporations. They have research divisions within corporates. Or if we look at academia, this is actually where a lot of the innovation takes place in academia in terms of university discoveries, explorations, or research. So this is the bottom one. An example of that would be like IBM Research. It's been one of the most prominent organizations that does a lot of this at this specific level. Second, with a more defined problem, where we have a greater understanding of the problem, but the domain is not as much defined, is where we get to breakthrough innovation. So here, these are problems that we know very, very well, but they're just very, very difficult to solve. An example of that would be something like, how do we solve the concept of pollutants in our water or in the atmosphere? This is where a lot of climate change, innovation breakthroughs take place. We understand the problem very, very well, yet coming up with a feasible, with a viable solution is very, very difficult because the domain is not fully defined. And this is where we get mostly what is termed as open innovation platforms. So in this case, what you do is you bring about domain experts that get combined with technology experts to kind of work together, work hand in hand on solving these problems. And an example of that is a company called Procter & Gamble. They actually have their own innovation platform internally, which basically allows them to benefit from the expertise of a variety of domains and subject matter experts globally for developing new products and services. Next, we're going to look at the top right quadrant here, which is sustaining innovation. And I think an example of that, starting off with an example of that would be Apple. So this is where there's a lot of innovation that takes place within this quadrant. Because we've already established something very, very good. We've established something that is very innovative. But what happens is we need to continuously improve that. And this is why I put the example of Apple. Is if you look at the Apple iPhone, it was an amazing innovation way back when it was launched. I think it was 2007, 2008, in that time frame. But since then, the iPhone has been the same iPhone, just minor updates, minor innovative updates that have taken place over time. So companies will still do that. Any company that has a product that has a very, very innovative product will continuously update their products and services internally through R&D labs, through design thinking, even through acquisitions, where you find a lot of the larger corporates will now start to look, if they can't develop something internally from an innovation standpoint, they will actually acquire a company like a startup that has a specific innovative product or idea that would be incorporated with theirs. So this is just to basically keep up with innovation, keep up. We have a very well-defined domain and we have a very well-defined problem. It's just a matter of sustaining it to remain critical in the market. Another example, of course, is Amazon. When it was launched, it was an innovative concept from an e-commerce standpoint. And then right now for Amazon, it's about maintaining that and continuously maintaining and growing their market share. Now, the fourth quadrant is probably the most interesting one. This is the one that we term as disruptive innovation. So this is where basically this is the most troublesome area, because the value here isn't immediately known. So you have your domain defined very, very well, but you're looking at problems that may not necessarily be problems, but you're trying to come up more with solutions or more with actually finding opportunities. If you look at some of the major innovative products that have been launched recently, it's not necessarily that there was a problem and they were invented to solve that problem. It's more that they saw an opportunity in the market, so they capitalized on that, and that's what had resulted in some of these great innovative startups that became large companies that produce a lot of these consumer products that we use every day. So this is an area that requires a lot of investment initially. There's a lot of failure that takes place here. And there's a lot of innovation labs, lean launch pads that would be required, kind of like a whole ecosystem would need to be set up in disruptive innovation in order to actually make it happen and in order to sustain it. So an example here, of course, would be a company like Tesla. Now, you could argue that, there's always been that concept of electric cars. It's actually, even if the concept was there, it was never really commercialized until Tesla took on that, and they became the first global player in actually making that happen. If you look at companies such as Netflix, they basically dominated the entire video or movie market by providing movies on demand online without necessarily having to go to a movie store like people did back in the days. So again, in terms of any specific product or a company, they could actually begin anywhere on these domains and they could actually move. So you'll see a company that has a major disruptive idea, that had to go through all the basic research. It became disruptive, and then eventually it just fits into the sustaining innovation domain. So some of these will go through multiple quadrants of that matrix, depending on when that specific product or company was in its phase previously, how it evolved, how the market evolved, what dynamics changed in terms of consumer retention and all that. And then when we look at modern innovation and we compare specifically the two quadrants of interest here, which are incremental innovation and disruptive innovation, what we're looking at basically here is comparing them in this matrix based on the technology change axis and the market impact axis. So does a specific concept or product have a low technology change or a high technology change? And is the market impact significant or not so significant? Previously, we had shown the matrix based on the problem and the domain. Here specifically, when we look at incremental and disruptive, which are the two highlighted ones, we're going to compare them using the technology and the market impact. So when we look at starting off with incremental innovation, basically these are like small gradual changes, gradual improvements to existing products, services, processes, methodologies, whatever it is. It could be a hardware product, a software product, it could be a paid service, whatever that may be. These are incremental innovations that take place over time, very small, very gradual, and they're just more of an optimization or improvement. And if you look at it, the example we gave earlier in terms of the iPhone, I mean, the iPhone was an amazing, innovative product. And if you look at all the different versions that are released, the iPhone still retains significant market share, and it does so by doing incremental innovation. So there's not a huge difference between, say, the iPhone, whatever the latest one is, 13 or 14 versus the iPhone 10. Just simple gradual changes. There's nothing completely disruptive about it. It's just more gradual changes. but it's necessary to do that in order to maintain the product integration and also in order to maintain market share. If we now look at the disruptive innovation domain, this is again a very exciting one, because this is where the major breakthroughs or new discoveries that fundamentally change the entire market or the way we do things. This is what takes place here. So disruptive innovation basically can totally create a new market that did not exist before. It could transform an entire industry from what it was. And there's, of course, with that comes a high degree of risk and uncertainty. So disruptive innovation is where most of the uncertainty is, and most of the risk is. At the same time, it's also the greatest reward. So as an innovator, by doing something that is high risk, you're also, if it's successful, you're doing high reward. There's also a lot of failures that take place in the disruptive innovation domain as well. And so basically, according to the late Clayton Christensen, who was actually a Harvard Business School professor, and he's the one actually who architected this entire theory of disruptive innovation. Say he's the godfather of disruptive innovation. So he mentions that 95% of the over 30,000 products that are released every single year fail. So 95% of 30,000. So that just gives you a sense of how difficult it is to retain any sort of or to acquire any sort of success in this specific space here. If you look at this space at the same time, that's where actually a lot of the most innovative startups that ended up being day-to-day household items or household products or household services for us came out of. These all came from disruptive innovation. If you look at social media and how people used to communicate, say, before social media, it was mostly through email. And then, came along SMS, text messaging. But social media was a major disruptor in this case when companies like Facebook, Twitter, and later on Instagram and Snap were born, because they connected billions of people all at once through multiple dimensions. So that was a complete game changer. If you look at a company that came out of the last recession that took place in 2008, 2009, Airbnb, that completely disrupted the real estate market in the sense that you have basically a startup platform that has technically more rooms to rent or to lease than the largest hotel chain. So this is a company that has zero real estate assets, yet they have the greatest number of real estate leases available for people to rent. So through Airbnb, you can rent an entire house, and then it's basically peer-to-peer. Also, if we look at e-commerce, if you look at Amazon, as being kind of the first major one, that's a complete game changer and disruptor in terms of e-commerce and bringing products, right to your home. We talked about Tesla when it comes to transport, and then if you look at mobile, we talk about the iPhone and the Samsung. Basically, the smartphone evolution was also a major disruptor to what people were using previous to that, say previous to the year 2005. And then also, if you look at things like payment technologies or transaction technologies such as Stripe, that became a very mobile type of payment method that was very convenient. Basically, you can go anywhere, have a little booth, and you can connect with your consumers and be able to purchase from them. So basically, there's a lot of that, and also more recently, of course, with blockchain technologies, AI, VR, a lot of these new technologies as well. These are all disruptive, and all are very important. When you look at incremental innovation, I mean, they help organizations to stay competitive and maintain that steady stream of improvements, while disruptive, on the other hand, it helps organizations differentiate themselves from others, from competitors, and also, most importantly, creating new opportunities that are creating new markets or new industries or completely new trends as well. The other two that we haven't really touched upon much are sustaining innovation and radical innovation. So sustaining innovation is just, again, continuous improvements to products to basically retain any sort of market status or market share. And while radical innovation basically is you do a significant technology change, but there's not much of a market impact, but it could certainly, bring up a product that eventually becomes disruptive. So it's a radical innovation, but there's no major market impact on it yet. So it's not fully disruptive yet. In terms of innovation, one of the things is if you want to innovate, this is the problem with innovation, is once you start, you cannot stop. And some of these major companies that you see here on the left, some of you may be, I guess, old enough to recognize some of them, maybe Nokia, handheld phones. Nokia was the dominant cellular product in the market that had a peak of about 39% market share. This was back in between 2005 and 2008. BlackBerry was the first major smartphone that actually had a physical keyboard. And at one point it had penetrated 50% of the US premium smartphone market and 20% globally. This was to the point that people referred to it as a crackberry rather than a BlackBerry because of how significant the deployment was. Some of you probably remember the old, the pre-digital cameras like the Kodaks. Kodak, the company, dominated the entire photographic film market to the point that, they referred to something called the Kodak moment. Basically, this is, if you wanted to create the most memorable moment that is worthy of photographing, that was referred to as a Kodak moment. So that's how much prominence this company had. And then finally, this probably applies to those of you who've lived in Canada or the US, but I remember when we were younger, the only way to watch a movie was to actually go to a Blockbuster video store to rent the VHS movie, basically bring it home, watch it, and then you had it for like a day or 3 days or however long, and then you had to return it back, and you would have to wait for new releases to be able to watch movies. So that was the only way that you would basically be able to watch on-demand movies, is to go to Blockbuster. And then when we look at these companies that basically thrived from kind of the early 90s up until about 2010, you look at today where these companies are at. So Nokia is almost non-existent in the market today. As a company, it still exists. It's trying to innovate and work on other concepts that are not just mobile related, kind of more within network infrastructure, but it has a very, very insignificant market share compared to companies like Apple today, for example, or Samsung. So Nokia is completely off the chart. BlackBerry is completely off the chart as well. And these are the two dominant players right now. We see Apple and Samsung, where they've continuously evolved, continuously innovated, and they created significant market share and have retained it and increased it since then. If you look at Kodak or Blockbuster, I mean, the Kodak, the physical camera itself, even though they were actually the first, Kodak actually invented the first digital camera back in 1975. Back then it was the size of a toaster, so it was quite big. But they were good at inventing it, but they were not good at innovating or actually getting it to the market. So that's a problem that they have. They didn't know how to actually continuously execute with that innovation. It's one thing to come up with something. It's one thing to see something. It's something else to completely do something with it and actually make something out of it. And that's definitely what Kodak had failed to do. And Blockbuster, of course, has been now replaced with Netflix. So there's definitely all these innovative companies, like, BlackBerry was, I remember it was called Research in Motion. It came out of Waterloo University. It was one of the best research divisions that was doing all this great work on mobile technology and smartphones. It became completely destroyed because they refused to continuously innovate. And that's basically what happens with companies that don't do this continuous sustaining innovation. When it comes to sustainable innovation from an organizational perspective, and if we look at basically who's involved, so there has to be a culture that basically makes this entire ecosystem work, and that basically involves various levels, various components and aspects of it. So starting off with leadership within any organization, they basically set the tone, the vision, the mission, the values, the priorities of the organization, and all the proper decision making and action. You have the employees that are also major contributors to innovations, and we've seen this a lot, of course, with the tech companies, where employees were actually given freedom and flexibility to come up with certain ideas that has actually resulted in actual products within companies. And I believe that's how, if you look at Gmail, for example, it was just a product by one of the divisions that working at Google that actually created that. So employees play a significant role within the sustainable innovation cycle. Customers also, they drive demand, they provide feedback. With customers, you can gauge how well they like a product or service, and that also tends to drive, your sustainable innovation vision as to how you respond to that. Your suppliers, depending on what you have in the market, what the feedback is, things like cost, et cetera. That all is very important to cycle back into this entire cycle and get feedback from them. Regulators play a very, very important role. So as an innovator, whether an individual, a startup, an organization, it's important to know what the regulations are. There's a lot of economic incentives that may be available for entrepreneurs and for innovators, or even innovative aspects and concepts, such as what we see today with a lot of the climate change policies, all the legislation towards promoting climate change innovation and innovative products and services. And then finally, stakeholders. So these can be investors, they can be institutions that generally are partners, or partners, investors. They could be NGOs, industry associations, or even academic institutions. There's a lot of feedback that gets involved here to basically continuously support in developing solutions to sustainability changes. So this is basically when it comes to creating that culture of sustainable innovation and all the key components that are required. And we're going to compare that to disruptive innovation. And primarily here, I'm talking about the startup world. So I'm talking in the context of startups, not large organizations, because this is generally where a lot of these ideas are born. And if we look at the characteristics of a startup culture, it's a different breed of people. It's people that have significant passion in terms of what they do. They eat, they breathe this culture, this breadth of what they do. They have a very unique personality in terms of this is also what defines their startup and what makes it unique. And if you look at some of these prominent startup founders that you have today, I mean, sometimes their personality has a significant influence to the success or the makeup of the startup as well. They're very agile, so they're very capable of having knowledge, information, decisions that flows much faster, but at the same time much more reliable than within large organizations. And they're very authentic in that they basically have the freedom and respect of everyone's own individual identity, as opposed to large bureaucratic companies or processes where things are a lot more structured. And then if we look at how to build that successful startup culture, of course, it starts off with having the right teams in place, taking great care of the teams and of the employees, of the individuals, of the stakeholders, showing great leadership from the startup level and then within the stakeholder level as well, and striving always towards major achievements, because in the startup world, as a culture, if you want to succeed, it's all about achievements. It's either it's purely about results. There's no such thing as we worked hard or we tried. It's just either you do or you don't. But the culture that you're working with, the culture you're surrounded with, needs to fully understand that. And then finally, there's some key enablers that are required. This is slightly now outside the control of the culture environment, but that needs to be available and facilitated by the environment in order to make that successful. And these key enablers are basically the funding, so venture capital funding, the ability of funding, being able to come up with disruptive, innovative ideas and concepts in an area or in a jurisdiction where you have support from venture capital, you have people that can fund. There is a mature venture capital scheme that enables you to start, with pre-seed and get seed, and then evolve into Series A, B, C, and beyond in terms of your investments. Also having the right infrastructure, so setting up, if you want to have this successful innovative culture, you need to also be in an area or in a jurisdiction or domain that has the appropriate infrastructure for you to test your sandbox solutions, to be able to deploy your products. You need to have the talent within your organization and rely more on your internal talent rather than outsourced talent. The market demand needs to be there, because you can have the most innovative, most disruptive product that you can think of. But if the market is not ready for it, if it's too early for the market, then it's simply not going to actually, it's not going to happen. Just like the example we gave with Kodak, coming up with the first digital camera prototype back in 1975. So that was before there was internet, before there was, even if you had a digital camera back then, there's very little that you'd be able to do with it. That's an example of coming up with an innovative idea, but your timing is completely out. Or that's like when BlackBerry, for instance, they decided to replicate what iPhone did in the smartphones, and they tried doing this now in 2012, 13, but it was way too late because iPhones had already dominated the market. So timing is extremely important. Market demand determines also the success and failure of that. And then also finally having flexible regulations. So you need to make sure that you're in an environment that understands what you're doing, that supports what you're doing. One of the key things, for example, like within the UAE, is now with all of the new technologies that you see in terms of blockchain and Web3, you see that the regulators are quickly rushing to be able to support that. And through all the local financial centers, it's very easy to register a blockchain company and that, whereas in other jurisdictions globally, it took time for that to happen. So it's also very, very important to make sure that the jurisdiction, the governmental regulations, the incentives that will actually enable your disruptive innovation are there. So this is kind of a summary in terms of what kind of is required for creating that culture within disruptive innovation. And then finally, before we finish off here, we'll talk about the technology transfer as a catalyst for innovation. So here we're basically, there's various technology transfer. It's a very, very powerful catalyst that enables new products, new processes and services that get developed and commercialized a lot more quickly and efficiently. And some of the ways that this can happen basically is by having access to these new technologies. So this accessing new technologies, it allows organizations to access what they have not developed on their own. And this could provide them with a competitive advantage. It could open up in new markets for them as well. Second point, in terms of collaboration and partnerships, right now we're in an age where it's very, very difficult to do everything on your own internally. So even if you look at any sort of a device, there's no company that fully designs and develops every single aspect of that device. There's components that come in from all different parts of the world. There's technologies that come from different places. Everything comes in different shapes and forms. So collaboration and partnership are more important than ever in order to actually maintain that development of new development line of new products and services. Third point is on the commercialization of research. So there's a lot of significant research that takes place, particularly within academic institutions. Unfortunately, it has great potential. It doesn't get unlocked because students typically move on to jobs and all that hard work sometimes doesn't materialize. Whereas that's where a lot of the base technologies are born. That's where a lot of the ingenuity is born, is in these academic institutions. It's just a matter of having it actually realized and unlocked. Then comes the development of new markets. So with new markets, we have new opportunities that arise, and then we also have the time it takes to get to markets. So getting to a market fast is extremely, extremely important, rather than just making to the market when you're too late. And then finally, all about cost savings, especially what we see now in terms of significant inflation and price increases. So we need to leverage existing technologies and infrastructure to ensure that these cost savings are all in place. So these are just some of the aspects that basically act as a catalyst for innovation when it comes to technology transfer. And finally, with all of that together, and then just looking at this very, very high level. So what it takes to innovate is actually having a fully integrated and enabled innovation ecosystem. So this consists of innovation hubs that are basically startup incubators and accelerators, the key technologies or access to technology, startup launch pads, so having very specific programs that enable you to quickly get your idea to market. Corporations play a big role because they do a lot of, right now, a lot of corporations do internal innovation programs, and they have internal R&D. Academia plays an important role because of all the research that takes place. Investors or getting access to funding and finance is extremely, extremely important, as it's the only thing that can actually enable your product to get developed and deployed to market. Having mentors, learning from people that have done it before, having that culture of innovation, having the appropriate regulations, or at least lobbying for them if they're not available. And then finally, last but not least, is having that innovative community, that innovative mindset. These are just, again, some of the key components. This was very, very brief. It is very difficult to actually discuss, to talk about innovation because it's so broad and there's so many different aspects of it and kind of fundamental approaches. But basically, I just wanted to give as brief as possible on the specific topics that were provided by our friends here at the program. So hopefully that touched upon it. And I'd be more than happy if there's any questions, whatever time we have left, if there's any questions, we'd be more than happy to take on that. So thank you all very much. Thank you again to all the participants. Great pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Anas, for the really valuable insights. This is a masterclass for me, and I hope that it has inspired the attendees as it has inspired me. We have many questions populating the Q&A box, and I'll be addressing some of them to you with the time we have left. We don't have much time left, so I would ask you to be as brief as possible so we could take as many questions as we can. So the first question is, how can we transform our existing business model to adapt to a changing environment? Is it necessarily costly?
There's definitely always a cost to it, but it's also extremely important to find out, to make sure that you're not doing what someone else has done. That's why a lot of these accelerator programs are important, or even right now looking at things such as, venture studio models when it comes to startups. It would be very important because one of the things that we see is there's a lot of people trying to do the same things that others have done, not learning from their mistakes. There's a lot of valuable lessons in the market. It's much more worthwhile to actually take the time and get the lessons and see what people have done, what has worked, what has not, what has resulted in significant cost savings for some, so that you don't repeat the same mistake and unnecessarily spend certain money on something others have tried. So learning and from collaboration would be of utmost importance.
Great, thank you. You have mentioned incremental innovation and disruptive innovation, and you have really told us the difference between the two types of innovation. But how can companies really balance the need for incremental innovation to maintain their existing products and services with the need for disruptive innovation to drive growth and stay competitive in the long run?
Well, that's a very good question that will require probably a lot more time, but I mean, just very, very briefly, I mean, when it comes to innovation, innovation is not static. It's always going to change. Products and companies themselves, they're not static. They're always going to change. So what was a disruptive innovation at one point may just become incremental innovation at another point. With time, things change, markets change, industry changes, consumer sentiment changes. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration. But from an organizational standpoint, companies need to always be looking ahead and not get caught up with their successes, because sometimes the biggest danger to your failure is actually your success. Sometimes your success, and we've seen that in a lot of companies, their success is actually what led them to failure, because they were complacent and they were not thinking about, I've made it to this point, I've dominated a certain market, and they basically think, they underestimate all of these other disruptive innovations that are going to come. So they have to keep incrementing, they have to keep in the incremental innovation and sustaining innovation quadrants, and they have to continuously make improvements, whether it's within their own products and services, whether it's through acquisitions, or whether it's through partnerships and collaborations.
Great. We have had many questions related to emerging technologies, whether AI, blockchain, etc. What role do you think emerging technologies such as AI and blockchain will play in driving innovation in the coming years? And how can companies effectively leverage these technologies?
Again, that's a very difficult, loaded question. But with all the emerging technologies, basically, it's taken the same lessons that with all the technologies that came about like 10 years and 20 years ago. With the cellular revolution, with the social media revolution, with all of these innovative products and services. Basically, ultimately, your biggest benefit out of all of this is the consumer. You're either selling a product or a service. What is the consumer behavior? What is the consumer going to be wanting as part of this? So you have a blockchain. I'm not a blockchain expert, but you have a blockchain service that you're providing. What exactly is it that you are trying to solve, or what specific solution that you're trying to solve? I see a lot of companies that get approached all the time by all these companies, especially in the last 2 years, that were blockchain, but you find out that sometimes some of these startups, they themselves have little understanding of what they are actually trying to do. So it doesn't matter as much about the technology that you're developing or you're working on, as much as it is, does the market really need it? Is there a product market fit? Because that will determine the success of what you're doing, or that will determine all this cost burden that you do, basically spinning your wheels and not being able to have it materialize in any commercialized product or service.
Great. I'm sorry, I'm giving you loaded questions, but I'm just trying to aggregate the questions we are getting, and we are doing so well. So I'm trying to get as much as we can from you. So what do you think the biggest risk is what is the biggest risk that an innovator can take?
Biggest risk an innovator can take is not taking the risk in the first place. So the fact that the innovator is taking risk, that on itself is first step, and that's really good, because there's definitely going to be risks all along. My humble advice would be just to always have a roadmap, always have a plan in terms of where exactly you are and where you are trying to be, and then just make sure that all of these steps that you're foreseeing and you're envisioning are in place. So making sure that the idea is validated, it's been validated in the market, has a proof of concept been done, has a pilot been done, is there enough funding to sustain it, who are you going to partner with, what specific mentorship support you're going to get. I say mentorship is probably the most crucial thing, because that's going to drive you in the right direction. That's going to cut a lot of time. So get mentorship and seek mentorship advice from people that have done it, that have been in that field, so that, again, they don't waste a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. Because the biggest risk is what you're working on today, 6 months from now, may be completely irrelevant and obsolete. So timing is of the essence. And that's why it's extremely important to get as much of that advice up front, firsthand, and then make the decision or determination as to in which direction you proceed.
Okay. Now, a question related to sustainable innovation. Do the same principles of sustainable innovation apply to governmental institutions, for example?
It depends on, yes, that's a good question. It really depends on the governmental institution. Government institutions should basically, act and behave just like corporates. There needs to be, and we see that happening already. A lot of governmental organizations are actually becoming more innovative. They're taking more innovative approaches. They are trying to become a lot more efficient, and they're actually trying to be considered almost as corporates. In comparison to the way legacy or government organizations had acted, or they had inefficiencies in terms of cost and output. So yes, government organizations can certainly take on these same building blocks, and we see a lot of innovation already happening within governmental entities. So the exact same lessons are applying. At the end of the day, the government is like an organization or a corporation that is providing a service. So that service that they're providing needs to be viable, it needs to be practical, and it needs to have a consumer base. And they need to make sure that they have this sustaining innovation aspect to what they're doing so that their products, their services are always up to date. And they're also at the same level as the private sector, because of course we see that the private sector is always ahead when it comes to that. However, I guess fortunately more so in the Middle East and the GCC area primarily, we see that governments have become a lot more ambitious in their technological and innovative approaches. They've become a lot more efficient, and they're deploying a lot more models that enable them to be a lot more efficient, a lot more effective. And this, of course, requires innovation strategies to be embedded within the framework of what they are doing internally within the government organization.
We have run out of time. I'll wrap up with one last question. Is innovation always a top-down process?
Not necessarily. It can also be bottom-up, because sometimes at the bottom is where you understand where the problems and where the opportunities are. Top-down is just a direction, is more directional, but bottom-up is where, you know, the bottom is what is that has the visibility. They're the ones that, and these could be, again, employees, they could be consumers, they could be the, you know, certain, any sort of, you know, external relationship. That's where that very important feedback comes in to determine the level of innovation that needs to be done within the organization to sustain itself.
Thank you, Anas, so much for your valuable insights. And to our attendees, please do not forget to fill in the survey that will be sent to your registered email. We look forward to seeing you soon for another exciting session of KnowTalks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you for this.